My paternal grandfather was a pioneer in Pilot Butte. He was actually an immigrant from Germany, came over on, we don't know what boat, but came in steerage. It was $69 in steerage. And he couldn't stand the smell of cattle close confined, because that's where he was. But he took a homestead up at Balcarres near the File Hills Indian Reserve. After he had proved out his homestead, then he had heard there was some good land just east of Regina, so then he purchased land there. I think it was the $10 fee. It's now a century farm. He built his own stone house, which is still standing and occupied, and it's over 100 years old. And the other grandfather came from Austria, also an immigrant, and he settled just northeast of Zener. That was his first choice, but he couldn't find water. So he asked if he could abandon that settlement, and he could. So he found land that nearby, which was just north of Pilot Butte, about 2 miles. It's also a century farm. I say that my grandparents were really tough and hard-working, and I'm really proud of what they accomplished, and I'm thinking if I could have done half. My grandmother, with 10 children, kept the farm going for about 15 or 20 years, and then when some of the younger kids needed better education than what they could get at Pilot Butte, then she bought a house on St. John Street in Regina and lived there. Times were pretty tough, so she lived there so that the kids could get high school education. I'm really proud of my grandparents. They came with very little. My one grandfather had $4 left by the time of his passage money by the time he got here to Saskatchewan. And of course, not speaking the language, but he worked for German-speaking people until a friend of his said, you would learn English much faster if you worked for an English-speaking family. So that's what he did. My dad was one of the few farm boys that was sent to university, and he was in the very first agricultural class at the university at Saskatoon. So he had an advantage there that he learned all kinds of things that later served him very well, because the land that he bought after we moved from that house, which was along the Boggy Creek, but it was marginal land. So we had cattle and so on, and in the 30s you couldn't make a living on the farm, on that kind of farm. It was so dry and so on. So he had a small road building company. As I say, my father bought property along Boggy Creek. Quite attractive, quite picturesque down in the creek. There are lots of native trees growing and so on. And we had birds there that we don't see anymore. There were robins and meadowlarks and orioles and warblers and all kinds of birds besides crows and sparrows and so on. We don't see them anymore. I think our favorite place actually was we kids played in the creek an awful lot. My mother had a garden on the other side of the creek, so we had to either wade through the raging water and so on in the spring before she could garden. And then my dad bought a huge timber and made a bridge across the stream. So here we were, not walking a tightrope, and I was afraid I was going to fall in the water. It wasn't that deep anymore, but in the spring runoff, it was quite turbulent. And there were trees down there, as I mentioned, all the birds and so on, and we had a playhouse down there, and that would have been, I guess, my favorite spot on the farm. Eventually my dad sold that farm because then he wanted to farm, and so he bought a whole section closer to Regina. The Trans-Canada has gone through it, and all the buildings along the east there, like the Memorial Gardens and the all those implement places along there, the dog kennels, and that was all his property at one time. And this where CTV is, that was, as I said, he got a whole square section at that time. And I'm very pleased to hear that there's a street now right along there that is called Zinken Street, named after my dad.